Okay. Well, we've had some fun today. So I had a really fun discussion, got started on Twitter, and the question is, how much regulation should the U.S. have over social media incorporated? That was really what it was. So I ended up doing tried to do a Spaces on Twitter. Twitter, unfortunately, forces Spaces through the app, so it wasn't that fun to try to figure out how to do the app and then try to make sure everybody's on board and then sharing it. Every time I tried to share it while still on the app and on the live stream, it would kick me out of the app. It was really dumb. So, and if I tried to let somebody in, it again would end the live stream. I think I've heard that feedback from others as well, so I'm glad it wasn't just me, but still trying to navigate a new platform. So this discussion about how to regulate social media and at what point is an important question. And I didn't realize how controversial my views would be to some of these people on Twitter. So basically what had started to occur was I had made a post about the new Twitter CEO and her views on content moderation. And so she's going to be taking over. Obviously, she truly believes in, honestly, censorship. She's a part of the World Economic Forum, and Elon chose her to be involved with running now Twitter. Not excited about that whatsoever. So what I expressed when she was trying to say content moderation, I expressed this on this original post in a couple different ways. But that content moderation must only regulate truly illegal content. If it regulates legal content, then Twitter no longer is a platform, but a publisher. More so if being run by a WEF plan, it becomes an arm of an anti-Christian, anti-freedom control. And so I was expressing this because this is an important point that many conservatives feel, that if you're going to regulate anything, it should only be what's actually illegal content. So obviously someone threatening someone's life, or someone being, putting out illicit and or, regulation stuff like child abuse, that are sexual child abuse or anything else like that, should certainly be legally regulated. So I'm not a free speech absolutist in the libertarian sense. I don't believe in no constraints for humanity. That's called chaos, and that's called allowing dark deeds to flourish, not punishing dark deeds. And so I believe that the state's responsibility is to set some parameters, but not to control whether or not what someone says outside of direct evil. And so that was my point. If a company tries to push their position on people about what their ethic is versus what the legal ethic is, that is a publisher. And publishers can exist. I'm totally fine with certain companies having certain positions. So like, Canon Press all the way to, Penguin Publishing. And they get to determine who gets to be under the name of Penguin Publishing out there for whether it's quality of the writing or the content of the writing. Totally fine. Now, but that said, I can't join one of those publishing houses and freely publish under their name without any checks, right? So, but you can do that when you sign up for a social media account. It's free, and you have the ability to self-publish as much content as you possibly want. And you should have the legal right to publish anything you want so long as it doesn't violate evil, so long as it isn't evil in the sense that it violates full understanding of what state law is. And so the question now is, to what extent should the state be involved in setting this? And that's a healthy discussion we can have. But unfortunately, there are those who are absolutists, who believe in total freedom of the internet, and it should be allowing. There are no rules whatsoever, and there should be no governing laws defining what we should and shouldn't say when it comes to certain things, like we shouldn't publish child pornography. Why is that? Why is that unusual? Why is that something problematic? It shouldn't be problematic. And if you're saying that it should be open, you're the one with the ethical problem. You're the one with the problem. not those who are advocating for censoring evil, true evil, right? And part of harming another person, not harming them emotionally, but actually trying to go after them and trying to harm them personally, physically, is an illegal act. And so that should also be taken down as well. But again, I actually believe that the platform itself shouldn't necessarily self-regulate in that fashion. It should be a legal declaration that this individual had committed an illegal act, was judged as that it was properly so, and removed. And so I'm definitely free speech, but I'm not for having no constraints whatsoever. So there are lots of people down in the tweets that, these tweets that were trying to say, I hate the First Amendment and it's just a bad legal take. Again, I wasn't making a legal argument, actually. I was making an argument for what I believe ought to be the legal position, not description of the current. And that's going to be most of these comments. Section 230 guy who tries to advocate for understanding of Section 230 jumped in and assumed that I was saying something about that I was not. I was not claiming anything about Section 230. I didn't even mention Section 230. And of course, there's people who say, you don't get your opinion. Well, then that's against the whole idea of free speech anyway. And then, someone accused me of lying about Section 230. Again, did I mention anything about Section 230? Do you see anything mentioning about Section 230 in here? No, you do not. I am asserting a position about what ought to be understanding when it comes to social media. And so then I saw these and I'm like, wow, I didn't anticipate this. So I dropped in a few corrective comments just in general, and see whoever would want to comment. I wasn't going to comment under anybody else's stuff, just put an extra thing here. By the way, I was not interpreting Section 230. I am asserting an argument that since Twitter is not merely a website but a public square, and since its original function was a platform, was later altered by leftist censorship, and because the regulation of content should be constrained to only illegal content, only meaning something that's truly a justified evil, and that's what should be removed. That kind of thing is what we should do. I understand that that's hairy business when setting the actual law. That's called the difficulty of lawmaking. I'm glad I'm not really the person doing the law, but there are things that I'd like to be included in the discussion when a lawmaker is doing the law. And I wouldn't mind having the opportunity to influence policy in whatever direction I'd like. And I think that's a healthy American position to have. So that's what I was doing. I'm having a public discussion about policy. And so there are those who kept wanting to say that I was making some claim about Section 230. I am not making any claim about Section 230 or current laws. I have to go through this a couple times here in stating that very fact. I am asserting that a platform is a descriptive term for public discourse in a digital sphere which encourages self-publishing under only legal constraints, and that a publisher is a privately controlled space for promotional publication under its criteria for discretion. To me, that's just a natural thing. These two things are logical definitions of what I believe should constitute what platform and publisher should represent, and should be, therefore, included in the legal description of what those are, regardless of the current status of it. This is called how you advocate for policy change. There's nothing wrong with advocating for policy change. The current policies are not sufficient to deal with the problems we have. And I'm not talking about regulating people's political opinions. Far from it. The opposite. I'm simply saying that when we are on social media, if you're going to use a criteria to eliminate content that someone else has published because you set them up to have the free ability to publish, you better have a criteria that aligns to the law and it's justly applied across the board. So, and most of social media in question were starting to define themselves as a platform, including Twitter at the beginning. By the way, this is also a derivative of many conservative congressional definitions. And so then, they've got into a bunch of discussions from a few different people about various things. And I keep having to point out, look, I'm not advocating for that this is what the current law says. I'm saying what we should put into law, what we should understand. But if we're going to make any rules regarding what kind of content, illegal content, should be censored, it should be truly illegal, as in it violates fundamental positions to people's rights. That's what should be censored. Not that it should be something that, I just don't like someone's opinion. No, that's not what I'm saying. People keep representing that. Now, the biggest of which was actually, and I'm going to see if I can find it here, the biggest person to retweet me, which I did not anticipate at all, and again, misrepresent what I was trying to say, was Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia and co-founder of Get Fandom and of Wikitribute Social. No, I did not say that we should repeal the First Amendment. Far be it. Nothing that I said had anything to do with that. And for sure, my position has nothing to do with that someone doesn't get the right to speak something. I'm giving guidelines, further guidelines for what already is established. And so this is the position that I'm trying to advocate for. That I'm asserting change in the status quo. I'm saying that I'm saying companies should not be thought of as private websites when it comes to a few different criteria. One, if their entry is free and public. Two, if they have publishing criteria that is not defined nor consistently applied. Three, that the scale of their business creates a monopoly. And four, that the laws of, generally speaking, should apply, like no threats, physical threats, and child abuse. Those are not violations of our First Amendment. You don't get to threaten somebody's life, and you don't get to publish child abuse. I'm sorry, you don't get to do those things. And anybody who's asserting that you can be is asserting not only a moral wrong, but certainly violating our current law. And then three, someone made the point, which is actually a good comeback, but I had to actually explain what I mean. So you're asserting that private property should no longer be treated as private but public. You're saying that to serve the public good, the government should tell private property owners how they must use their property. Okay, Comrade Cody, nothing at all. Thank you very much for that snide comment, but that is not at all what I'm saying. I am not saying that at all. I am saying the government already gives us classifications which we must choose from when starting a business. Sole proprietor, LLC, incorporated. I'm saying we expand these classifications for social media, so setting laws of what, how, and when a company must change is fully consistent legislation. Nothing I'm saying has anything to do with what he's saying, or what anybody's saying. And they keep wanting to say I'm saying none of those other changes involve government stifling speech. I'm not saying they should be stifling speech. And here's what I say. My proposal is if a website wants to assert publishing control, as in they're deciding in the beginning that they want control over what gets published, then they have to apply for that status when they're deciding to create a company. Hey, I want control over what people can say on my platform. Great. Here's the status you can reply to apply for, which requires them, however, to write the criteria that they're going to be enforcing, and that the government is going to ensure that they're going to apply that criteria consistently. The government is not setting the criteria, and what people are accusing me of saying is that I'm saying the government should set the criteria. What did I just say? I didn't say that. I never said that. I have never, ever, ever want or said that the government should set the criteria for what your businesses should be, or that they should change. I'm saying that if you violate your own criteria that you started for in the beginning of the company, that there should be a legal consequence. As in, you don't get to do that. You don't get to violate the terms that you set for regulation. In other words, you can't just haphazardly apply your principles over here and over here. You have to apply them consistently. Now, someone asked the question later on, what does that mean to apply them consistently? Well, I'll get to that in a minute. But ultimately, that idea is simply that when in reason, and if you would have to go to court over this because this is what happens, or there'd have to be a proper redressive process, or there'd have to be some, enumerated principles that must be met in order for you to properly understand what that means. Certainly there are bugs to be worked out, proper understanding of it, but it's fully logical and consistent with what they're currently doing to simply have criteria that the company themselves set and that their state requires them to carry out their principles. The company's principles apply universally. You can't just say you want to be a publisher and then haphazardly apply your criteria. I believe that the government should have a role in regulating if you are actually doing what you're saying you're doing, or are you lying to the public, you're lying to your constituency, and you are creating injustice, as in you are not applying what you have considered your policy consistently. And we already see that applied in many companies. There are many times where companies have to submit the kind of rules and the kind of procedures, especially if it's a nonprofit as well, an organization, that they have to abide by their rules. And when taken to court, if they don't abide by their own rules, their own bylaws, they are held accountable to that. So, again, my proposal is if a website wants to assert publishing control, as I've defined it, they apply for that status, which requires them to enforce their own criteria consistently. Or if a website would like users' control over their own content, a platform as I've defined it, not as it currently it's defined, how I'm defining it, they apply for that status. I am advocating for change of how we're doing things. This is not violating the First Amendment. This is advocating for current change of way things are. The current things of the way things are not at all something that is disruptive. Now, there are some aspects that the government's trying to do, which are trying to set moral guidelines that do not coordinate with the Constitution. And in that case, I would disagree. I would say that that's unjust. I'm not advocating for any of that. And so what I'm saying is you can apply for the status, and the law, and what you only have to then do is enforce what the law tells you can't do. You can't allow physical threats or child abuse to be openly perpetuated on your platform. You have to regulate that content and provide ways for people to be able to report that content, and then you do something about it. To switch categories between the two that I'm advocating for requires a separate license, just like switching from a sole proprietorship to an LLC. There's nothing different about what this is. None of this is tyrannical. None of this is outside of the norm. None of this is not already done in other contexts. They're just not applying the same contextual understanding of what we're talking about here to this situation. That's all I'm saying. Do the same thing. Apply this idea and define what I mean by platform, and this is, by the way, has already been discussed in the Congress. This isn't me just coming up with some absurd thing. These descriptions of what I'm talking about between a platform and a publisher are already been discussed in legislative hearings with conservatives. Conservatives have been leading. Ted Cruz is one of them, leading the charge in describing that what Facebook and others have been doing is acting as a publisher and not a platform, as they have been as the concepts have been intended, and they have been advocating for describing the descriptions of my definitions in Congress. None of this is whatsoever left field. None of this is outside the realm of discussion. None of this is absurd conversation. This is all viable, openly discussed, normal policy changes that I am advocating for, which would absolutely make things clearer and keep companies consistent. So, if the platform switches to a publisher, as I've defined them, they must create their own public criteria for publishing and submit this, which the government will hold them accountable. Again, this is not different than any current system. It simply requires the companies establish their intent at their creation, and when changing it much, much later, they must create an open public criteria which the government will hold them to account. That's ethical and just. That is not gutting the First Amendment. There's nothing about what I just said. It's literally applying what's already in existence. And if you're saying that what's already in existence is gutting the First Amendment, okay, we can have that discussion. But then you need to also attack what's currently being done. Because I don't believe it's unethical to properly say that a company, when they're setting their rules, should abide by the rules that they set. That's not unethical. That's not unjust. That's not illogical. It's illogical to think that they don't need to do that. It's illogical to think that they have no responsibilities whatsoever to actually carry through with what they've declared they are. I mean, that's the same thing as when people can sue over the idea of when you're talking about false advertising. It's the same idea. You're suing over something that is a intended thing to be done that the company is reneging on. Is not doing what they're supposed to do. And that is a significant problem with what is happening. There is no descriptions whatsoever that is describing what the company should actually do, and then just based on normalcy, not saying that there's any impression, there's no criteria coming from the government saying you have to do this. This is the company themselves setting the criteria and the government going, okay, you're going to make sure you apply that to everybody, right? That's all it's doing. And that's a fair and accurate description of legislation. That's the whole point of legislation. Now, I tried to have a Spaces discussion about this, which was an interesting thing. I think I hadn't ever done a Spaces before, so it was definitely not as polished as I'd like it to be. But I got at least one of the guys who we were discussing here Twitter pated, and he had some great questions. So I wanted to address some of these questions as well. Number one, conservatism is not founded on biblical truth, because I was making the claim about what conservatism is. I was explaining where my positions are coming from, because I'm not a libertarian. I don't believe that there should be no laws whatsoever, or that there should be almost no laws. There are laws that have to be consistent with biblical truth. That's the point of a conservative. And he said it's not based on biblical truth. Actually, everything about conservatism is about biblicism. It's about whether or not the truth that we're claiming is proper for society. And what that means from a conservative's position is that you are representing what the biblical truths are. Judeo-Christian principles are what birthed conservatism. If you want to go read several books about the birth of conservatism, I can give you great examples. But the birth of conservatism was on two planes. One, that all authority must be held in check all the way down to the local level, that we should have checks and balances in all authority. And that two, that the Bible should be the paramount description of all truth in every sphere of society. That's what a conservative believes. That's what we're conserving, because that was true at the beginning of our nation. And what has happened is, as it's continued to go, it has eroded this idea. And so conservatism is, let's saying, we're going to get back to our biblical roots. We're going to get back to our constitutional roots. And that is what conservatism is. I'm a history teacher. I can give you ample resources for yourself to educate yourself on this. But let me tell you, that's the quick description. And so he asked me, all right, so and I explained you have to strike a balance between anarchy and tyranny with biblical truth. He said, what does striking a balance between anarchy and tyranny have to do with biblical truth? So I began to explain, what does that mean? Where do we get the idea how do you strike the balance between anarchy and tyranny? I was getting into the discussion, explaining it, starting at Genesis, and explaining how what happened at Genesis was that Adam and Eve tried to create their own truth. And the temptation of Satan was that Satan said, yeah, you could go ahead and do that. You can create your own truth. It doesn't matter. God actually knows you can create your own truth. And if you had that opportunity, if you decided to make your own law, God actually kind of freak out because he knows you're pretty powerful. That is literally the lie from Satan, because that's exactly what Satan did. Satan was saying he gets to be his own God, and he's deceived enough in the head to do that, and he tried to deceive the creation to do the very same thing, to be in rebellion against God's order and God's design as the sole authority for the universe. And so that's where it starts. Between anarchy and tyranny is what accords to what is supposed to happen. What is the balancing point between something that is not ordered whatsoever and something that's tyrannical, where there's so much order, no one can do anything. And this is the description that Jordan Peterson addresses, and this is one of my favorite resources to send people to, is Jordan Peterson's book on 12 More Rules for Life. Beyond Order is the name of the book, 12 More Rules for Life, where he sets up an excellent general kind of framework for discussing what strikes the balance. And ultimately, it's the individual, it's the sovereignty of the individual to speak truth so that the group is reformed. And so freedom of speech is primary, but it's not freedom to do unbiblical things. It's not freedom to do something that's beyond truth. It's freedom to speak the truth and to be able to instantiate the truth into the culture. And so what is required is, yes, you need to be very careful at when you define the limits to that, but you also need to recognize that there is a greater truth that you're compassing people to. And that is the difference, that ability to basically circumambulate society together by speaking truth into the society, aligning to the Logos, who he defines in the scriptures, through the scriptures, as Christ. Now he's not a Christian. He has some viewpoints that definitely diverge from true Christianity, but he is articulating that where we get our idea of freedom of speech is because we are Logos-bearing creation, and that how we are absolutely supposed to align to the Logos is by speaking and living according to it. Our lives instantiate or manifest the Logos made flesh. And so there are bounds to which we do this in society. Society has to create rules to play the game of life. And he talks about creating society's rules so that the game of life perpetuates. And he explains that from understanding Piaget's developmental psychology on explaining human perception, that how children as kids grow up as they create rules and they play games together, and everybody, kind of like playing house, abides by certain social contract rules. So he explains essentially social contract theory in a greater sense, and then applies that this idea also is mirrored in the foundations for Western society, which are derived directly from the scriptures. And so biblical truth, and particularly the Logos, Christ is the Logos made flesh. He is the truth, the word of truth. And so when we as human beings align ourselves in our group discussions to the Logos, we are trying to get a sense of who Christ is through examining the truth. But there's another layer to this, that there is a fundamental truth that describes who exactly God is and what exactly some of his rules for life are. God made his own book for rules for life, and it's called the Bible. And yes, it takes a lot of understanding to understand what it says, but some of it's very clear. And one of them is, man doesn't get to make his own truth. That is not possible. And when they do, it only serves to their destruction. And so how do we strike the balance between anarchy, which is rule by whatever individuals want, and rule by tyranny, which is rule according to a single or a group of people? How do you strike the balance between those two things? Well, it's by aligning oneself to the ultimate truth, and all of us trying to get a picture of what that ultimate truth is by co-examining it, using the Logos in a dialectic and speaking forth the truth and aligning itself to us. But there are bounds to that. There are things that clearly delineate that are not according to the truth. And those are called evil. The things that do not accord with fundamental reality as God is. He is the definition of reality. He is what defines it. His being defines reality. That which does not coordinate with that is evil. And so we strike the balance between anarchy and tyranny by aligning ourselves to the Logos, which is in biblical truth. And the question is, now what do we do with that? He was getting bogged. I didn't go into full detail like this. He was getting bogged down. Twitter Peter was getting bogged down by this. And so I touched on natural law, and he didn't understand what I was describing. I didn't mean that the idea, I was referring to natural the natural world. You cannot understand truth by purely in the natural world. That's called general revelation. You understand a couple things. One, who God is, and two, he's brilliant, and you can understand some of the basics of how God did some of those things, which is that he is a ordered God, that the universe is ordered, but you can't understand exactly what to do with from just the natural world or from just scientific reasoning. You have to understand from a theological position, which comes external to the physical world. Something has to impart truth into the generally revealed order of the world to understand the order. You have to get the rule book for the functioning hyper complex manual that is not only life itself, but society and how human beings are designed to function. And so the rule book, the actual manual for human being, the proper being as human beings, is the scriptures. And so when we're talking about setting law for social media, setting law has to align to the scriptures. And so you can't have this unbound perspective, because we are already naturally bound by two things: by the degradation, the natural degradation of society, which happens when it does not equate to God's order, and two, the moral degradation of society, which happens when it does not align to God's truth, God's moral being. And so that is what we have to align ourselves when we're talking about setting policy for something like a website. It has to align to biblical truth, and it goes all the way back to Genesis. And the idea of a libertarian ideal, that what the founding fathers were trying to say is nobody gets to define any moral, any guidelines, any structure to being, and everybody can just say whatever they want, including all evil itself. That is not what the founding fathers intended. The founding fathers were saying that this fundamental position is that speech is that is true, and two, that is not trying to accomplish evil, is viable. That is what freedom of speech is. It's the ability to speak truth in a way that is viable and ethical. When it violates fundamental rights that are protected by the Constitution itself, which are also protected by the law of God, it does not, you don't have that ability. You can't threaten somebody physically, and you can't do something that harms or shows harm in the sense that you are exploiting someone. You cannot sexually exploit them. We understand some of these basics. Now, this is why people who are free speech absolutists are not in alignment to biblical truth, because you can't be. Because the scriptures say there are things that no matter how much truth you get to speak, you don't get to do without punishment by the state. God definitely has rules for what the state should do. And again, this gets into the Christian nationalist argument, because essentially a lot of Christians don't believe that the state has anything whatsoever except all ability to make all law, and that's fine. But if the state has any decision on actually being biblical, we can't have them do that. But they can tell us when we can open our businesses. They can tell us when to get a shot. They can tell us all sorts of things. But they just can't tell us about to align themselves to the scriptures. Oh, okay, I see that, where that goes. So anyway, this discussion is an incredibly important discussion. I wish he could have continued. There was a lot of things that I think were unclear about Twitter-Pated's understanding of both natural law, both Aquinas, especially being Aquinas, being a Catholic, and about Adam and Eve. And I think that there is a lot of things that a lot of people in this discussion don't realize when discussing this topic. And it goes all the way back to the scriptures, and that's where you have to go. You cannot allow yourself to be your own God and authority. You do have to root everything you're talking about to biblical truth and what that means for how we navigate the space on regulation. And yes, we should have fair and just regulation, and the ideas that I'm describing are absolutely that. There's nothing outside of the norm with this, and it's not a slippery slope. It's just simply going, hey, you want to do this over here? Great. Just fill this form out, and then make sure, let me see what you guys are going to do. Great. Like, not saying that they can say no to something so long as it doesn't violate one of the constitutional ethics that they can't do, right? Can't deny someone else's their rights, their natural rights. So that's That's what this is. This is the whole point. We're not saying anything unusual here. This is not talking about anything that shouldn't be already self-evident. So that's as far as I'm going to go with this discussion. I hope this was somewhat beneficial to you if you care. And ideally, we'll have an opportunity to maybe have another spaces again where we can discuss these things and have more people comment in a live situation where we can have these discussions. Thanks a lot for joining me.